Welcome back everyone. So in today's lecture we will be discussing NMR instrumentation. So we will see the major or the crucial parts of the spectrometer which are required to detect the insensitive or detect the weak NMR signal. Okay. So by now we all understand that NMR is a very insensitive technique. And the reason for the insensitive nature of this technique is twofold. One is the low magnetic moment of protons or other nuclei, and let's say carbon, phosphorus, and so on, as compared to, let's say, electrons. Okay, and then low population difference in Zeeman levels. So this is all very clear to all of us, right? So what I mean is, here if you have a spin half system, alpha beta, then P alpha minus P beta is greater than 0, but at thermal equilibrium, but this value is very small, right? I mean, this is only 1 in 10 to the power 5. We have seen this calculation, right? Okay, so now let us try to understand what are the important parts of the instrument that work towards achieving this goal to visualize or to detect this weak signal. Okay, so the first and the foremost thing is the magnet. So we all know by now that magnet is required to create Zeeman splitting, right? So this is required to create, this is the role of the magnet, right? Okay, so now we also understand that if you have Zeeman splitting, the delta E, the energy difference between Zeeman levels is proportional to the strength of the magnetic field. So higher the value of magnetic field that you are applying, higher will be the delta E, and in turn the population difference will be higher. If the population difference will be higher, the sensitivity of the signal will be higher. So there is a quest to always look for higher and higher magnetic field strengths, right? Now, in addition to a large amount of magnetic field which is required for a good sensitive NMR spectrometer, we also need B0 to be homogeneous. So what do you mean by when we say homogeneous? That the strength of B0 should be consistent or should be same all across the volume of the sample. So when I say volume of the sample, what volume we are talking about? So let's say if this is a typical NMR tube which is made out of special glass, and this is a cap over here. So this length is roughly 7 inches and outer diameter is typical tube which are routinely used are 5 mm. There can be different shapes of tubes, but let's not go there. So typical length is 7 inches and the diameter is 5 mm. Internal diameter or inner diameter, you can say, will be roughly 4.4 to 4.2 mm, and you need at least 0.5 ml of sample which goes up to a height of 3 to 4 centimeter. Okay, so we are now talking about magnetic field homogeneity in this volume, in this area. Okay, not area, volume. So so meaning, so let's blow this up, let's zoom this area a little. So if this is our sample, the magnetic field which is experienced by a nuclei here versus a nuclei here versus a nuclei here versus a nuclei here, all has to be very exactly same. Now why it has to be same? So let's say if molecule, let me name these molecules as molecule 1 2 3 4. So if molecule or spin 1 will have let's say b1, not b1 field, b01 field, spin 2 has b02 field, similarly b03 field, b04 field, they will have their own alpha beta delta E values, right? So let's say 1 is smaller, then 3 is smaller than 2, 4 is somewhere here. So you see that the transition frequencies will also be different. So if magnetic field is not homogeneous, even though the spin is same, the molecule is same, or the atom is same, but their resonance frequencies will be different, and instead of getting a single sharp line for all four, you might end up getting 4 separate lines, and of course the intensities will be proportional to the relative population of these kind of spins. So idea is that overall you will see, instead of a sharp line, you will see a broad peak which is not defined by R2 by pi. So this will not work because you have added inhomogeneity. So instead what you will have is R2 plus R2 star divided by pi. Okay, so this R2 star is coming from magnetic field inhomogeneity. So this needs to be minimized so that we can get sharper and sharper lines, and we can get a better resolution in spectrum. Okay. Also, the moment you will start seeing broad lines, they will also start decreasing in intensity, because area under the curve has to be constant, which is proportional to the number of molecules over here. So that means your sensitivity, you will have resolution loss because of the increased width, and because of the decreased height of the signal, you will have a sensitivity loss, right? So inhomogeneity is very bad for good NMR spectrometer. So you want to minimize inhomogeneity. So that means you want to maximize the homogeneity of B0, and to achieve such a magnetic field, you need to work with coils where you can generate magnetic field by supplying electric current. Okay, so if you have let's say current in the coil, so you supply current in the coil via a battery or electric source. So you will have, so let me draw this opposite so that I can have north up and south down. So this is the direction of B0. Okay, so this is a typical electromagnet which you must have all made as a school kid by connecting a solenoid with a pencil cell, and then you see that nails get stuck to this and it starts acting as a magnet, right? So but this is limited by the current which you can apply to this coil. So why it is limited? Because the moment you apply stronger and stronger current, there would be a resistance associated with this coil, and then that resistance would actually melt the coil. It would heat up and melt the coil. So you can't really supply infinite amount of current to this coil, and thus the B0 is limited by the coil architecture, right? So then what you do is, so you move to something called as superconducting coil. So what is a superconducting coil? It is made up of a special alloy. So I'm trying to make a similar one. Here you don't have any electrical source. Okay, so at the time of charging of this magnet, so let me complete. So this is made up of antimony niobium alloy, Generally, these commercial spectrometer guys do not disclose the exact formulation of this alloy because of patent issues. So, but major constituents are niobium antimony, and this a typical superconducting magnet coil runs for several miles. So that means the length of it is huge. So all of this is I'll share the exact height and all, like how big this turns up, but the length of the coil actually runs into several miles. Okay, so now at the time of installation, when the charging of, there is a process called as charging of the magnet. So during charging of the magnet, you supply electric current, and then there is a circuit broken over here. Okay, so you supply negative and positive, and then you charge the magnet, and then you close the circuit, and then you remove these charge source, so that because it is a superconducting magnet, superconducting coil, there would not be, or there would be a very minimal resistance, so electrons will keep on circulating in this, generating a permanent magnetic field. Okay, I mean, as long as the electrons are circulating, there would be a B0, right? Now the whole thing works as superconducting only at 4 Kelvin. Okay, so 4 Kelvin temperature is achieved by liquid helium. So what they do is they put this whole thing into a chamber kind of thing, which is full of liquid helium. So this whole thing is immersed. So this whole coil is immersed in liquid helium. So this is the level of liquid helium which I have shown. So here you have liquid helium which is at 4 Kelvin. Okay, so if you look, I know this looks little confusing, why there is a gap in between. So if you look from the top, it looks like a circle. So it's a cylindrical kind of arrangement where there is a bore which is empty. So it's a these are two concentric circles. This is empty from inside, so there is a hole running through from top to bottom, and now your coil is wound around this hole. Okay, so there are several turns. As I said, this will run into several miles, so there are huge number of turns which keep on going like this. Okay, and now your B0 is coming out of the plane of the board. Like here B0 is moving upwards along z-axis, so that is your z-axis. In this diagram, z-axis is coming out of the plane of the board, right? So this is now drawn in transverse plane. Okay, so hopefully that part is clear. Now there is jacket, because liquid helium is at 4 Kelvin, there can be evaporation losses, so this will evaporate very fast. So what they do is they actually jacket it with a vacuum chamber, something like this. So the whole chamber is vacuum jacketed, both of them. So that liquid helium does not evaporate easily. And then further, this whole thing is then immersed into liquid nitrogen. Okay, so liquid nitrogen further stops liquid helium, or decreases the evaporation rate of liquid helium. So because liquid nitrogen comes cheaper, so it is better to fill liquid nitrogen. So liquid nitrogen filling frequency, liquid nitrogen also evaporates, so liquid nitrogen filling frequency is every week, and liquid helium filling frequency is once in 6 months, let's say. That depends on how big a magnet you have. So if the magnet size is bigger, the liquid helium requirements are more, so this filling frequency can be 4 months, 5 months. So this totally depends on magnet to magnet and the magnet architecture. And now this nitrogen further is, again, there is a vacuum jacket. And of course it is open from here, so again there is, because there is a bore going on, so it is open like this, right? So here, cuts here. Okay, so I hope this part is clear. So you have superconducting coil which becomes superconducting because it is dipped in liquid helium, otherwise it will be a normal coil. So here the temperature is 4 Kelvin, and here the temperature is of liquid nitrogen. Now there is an assignment for you. Find out what is the temperature of liquid nitrogen, which is maintained here. Now in this bore, or here in the bore, this is maintained at room temperature. We will see why. Okay. So bore is maintained at room temperature. Okay, so your overall assembly, so you don't feel this thing is also outside of this is also maintained at room temperature, so you don't feel it cold. Only the inner temperature, here it is liquid nitrogen temperature, and here it is 4 Kelvin temperature, right? Liquid helium temperature. Okay, so now you have charged the magnet and maintained the magnet at B0 magnetic field, let's say 11 Tesla or 14 Tesla. The highest NMR magnet as of now which is running is of 28 Tesla, and in non-NMR magnet in non-NMR applications, I think there is 145 Tesla, and that the next one is 35 Tesla. So these are for other purposes, not for NMR. But for NMR, this is the highest, which has a proton resonance frequency of 1200 hertz. Okay. All right. Okay. Now this whole thing has a height of so it from outside it looks like this. It looks like a big cylinder. We'll show you how it looks like later. This height is typically 4 to 6 feet. Okay, and this whole assembly stands on vibration free legs. There are 3 legs on which it stands up, something like this, and one at the back. Okay, so these legs have to be vibration free, because any external vibration, mechanical vibration, can also interfere with NMR signals. See, all of these are basically vibrations, right? So any external vibration which is happening on the floor, for example, if there is a train passing by, or if there is some electronic unit which is creating any kind of vibrations, they should not pass to the magnet through the legs. So the legs have a special architecture where they filter out any kind of floor vibrations which are happening in around the magnet. So through floor, these vibrations should not pass. So whenever they come and install the magnet, they will test the floor for vibrations, what kind of vibrations are present in that room, so that accordingly the legs have to be designed. Okay. Now this height is 4 to 6 feet, and this diameter of this cylinder is roughly I would say 3 feet or something, right? And then on top you would see there are certain ports which are there. These ports are for liquid nitrogen and liquid helium filling, because you need to replenish this nitrogen and helium. So you need to keep on refilling, so that the magnet stays at a particular temperature, 4 Kelvin, and the magnetic field does not or magnetic field stays constant, so you need to keep on refilling liquid nitrogen and liquid helium. So even if there is no experiment going on, to keep the magnet in its place, you need to be refilling, and that's one of the major cost factors of maintaining NMR spectrometers. All right. Okay. So now, in addition to these coils, there are certain coils around this which are also charged during the installation process. These are called as shim coils. So shim coils are the ones, see, you cannot change the architecture of the coil which has been provided to you by the company, right, by the manufacturer. So that architecture cannot be changed. If there is small issues in B0 homogeneity, in magnetic field homogeneity, then what you do is, so these coils are charged to certain extent, so that the overall B0, which is the resultant B0 from this big coil plus all these small coils, so overall B0 in this region of the magnet stays homogeneous. Okay, so this is the region where sample is going to come from top and sit here. So in this region of the magnet, so overall B0 is maintained using cryoshims. These are called as cryoshim coils, and the main superconducting coil. Okay, so cryoshims coils I will write. Okay, so in this one, the current is altered at the time of installation, so you can decide whatever current you want to give to maintain the homogeneity of B0. Of course, after the installation is done, these coils are also sealed, so you can't really perturb these coils later on, but it requires, like, user cannot do it, but it requires engineer to visit and do this cryoshimming again. Okay, so that is possible by with the help of an engineer, but you can do that. So in case if there is a homogeneity loss over the period of time, so you can again do it with the help of an engineer. Now, in addition to these coils, there are room temperature shim coils which are installed inside the bore over here. So over here, so these are certain coils which are also there. These are RT shim coils, that is room temperature shim coils. So why do we need this additional shim coils? Now, whenever we are inserting our sample from top to inside, the samples are also having their own magnetic susceptibility, right? So that means if there is a magnetic field flux which is passing through the sample, it will get perturbed. So there is small amount of susceptibility in the sample, which will perturb the magnetic field to a small extent. Now that is sample dependent. Every sample has its own magnetic susceptibility, and that's why the magnetic field perturbation by inserting individual samples are different. So whenever you are inserting a sample, so you have to, so this has to be the current has to be adjusted in these coils, so that it will provide additional magnetic field to again homogenize the B0. So basically nullify the effect of the magnetic susceptibility perturbations due to sample, and then it will again make the B0 homogeneous. So these are done whenever the sample is inserted. With each sample user has to do it. So this is called as shimming of the magnet. Okay, so shimming protocol. So this is done by perturbing current in the shim coils, room temperature shim coils. Okay, now in addition to this, there is one more coil which is surrounding the whole thing. Let me draw this as a B0 coil, or let's call it as lock, Z0 coil, lock coil. Okay. Now what is lock coil? So over the time when the experiment is going on, or whenever the instrument is sitting idle, so the B0, which is given by this coil starts to drift. So what do you mean by B0 drifting? So B0 drifts over time. So let's say if you are starting with 11.7 Tesla, it might end up in 11.699998 Tesla, or then this number keeps on changing, right? So what happens is that if the B0 is not constant, that means your delta E between alpha beta levels is not constant. If delta E is not constant, then your frequency of a particular nuclei where it resonates, or the spectral line where it comes, will be variable, right? So if that is variable, then your spectrum would not be constant. So instead of a line appearing at a single frequency, what you will have is a line appearing at multiple frequencies, right? So that is the scenario when B0 is drifting, which of course you do not want. So what they do is they provide another coil in which you can provide current so that to nullify the effect of this drift. Now how that happens? So in the sample you actually add an additive which is deuterium. Okay, so in any sample you add 2H in the form of, if the sample is water soluble, let's say, then you add D2O. If the sample is let's say dissolved in organic solvents, so then you add CdCl3 instead of CHCl3. So you add some proportion of deuterated solvent. It can be either any of the deuterated solvents. So what they do is, so why deuterium? Because deuterium frequency does not interfere with any of the frequencies which you are measuring. So for example, if you are measuring proton or carbon in your nuclei, in your molecule, deuterium does not interfere because its gamma value is very different. So that's why we use deuterium here. So what they do is, it has an internal mechanism of measuring deuterium signal, and and then checking if the deuterium signal is drifting apart from its theoretical value of frequency, then that much amount of current is supplied to this lock coil so that the frequency is shifted back. So what I mean is, if you have, so omega deuterium, omega of 2H is equal to gamma of 2H into B0, right? So now if B0 drifts, omega will drift, and if omega will drift, the spectrometer will get to know. This is an automated mechanism. So spectrometer will get to know that the frequency of the deuterium is getting shifted, and if frequency is getting shifted, it will supply current to increase or decrease B0, and this process is called as field frequency lock. This is all part of the magnet. So this field frequency lock coil is also present, and here the current can be supplied by user, or accordingly withdrawn by user, or the magnet itself. So you can keep it auto locked, or you can manually lock it, and then you can keep on supplying. So but most of the commercial spectrometers, they have this process as automatic process. So basically with the push of a button, or a command is given to lock the spectrometer at particular frequency. So if the frequency drifts, accordingly the current is changed in the coil, and then you bring back B0 by this coil, right? So this is, I've just drawn it as a single circle, but this coil has its own architecture, so that it can provide additional amount of B0. Okay, so I hope this magnet part is very, very clear. So in the next lecture, we will be looking at rest of the components, which basically include the electronics part, how to generate pulse, and how to generate a radio frequency pulse, and how to detect the signal. So that portion will come into transmitter section, and transmitter. So let me just write down for completeness. So in next lecture we'll be discussing transmitter, then receiver which receives the signal, and the probe. Okay, so that part will be covered in next lecture. I think that is all for today. Oh, let me also show you, I have it here. So this is the magnet which we just discussed. So you see these, this is the magnet over here, this whole thing, and you can see the user is sitting here. So this is roughly of the height, and these are the height of the user, and these are the anti-vibrational legs over here which run all the way down. So this is the second leg over here which you can see, and then there is a third leg over here. And then here, if you see, this is the bore of the magnet from where the sample is inserted on the top. Okay, so from here the sample is inserted, and then these are the ports from where the liquid nitrogen or the liquid helium is filled up. Okay, so these are liquid helium and liquid nitrogen ports. Rest of the components we'll see later. So this is console, which actually hides all the electronics which are which we just said that we'll discuss in next lecture. And then this is the user interface via computer. This also we'll discuss in the next class. This is called as cryo platform. All right. I think that is all for today. Thank you very much.